Hi, this is Bird from Birds SVGs, and I'm going to be sharing just a few of my favourite stencil techniques in this video. There are many, many more out there on the internet, so I encourage you to go and have a look for some more, but these are a few that I've recently enjoyed doing. I'm going to start with dry embossing, and my stencil is a little wide for this particular die cutting machine, so I'm just trimming my stencil down, and this is the joy of cutting your own stencils. It's unlike one where you purchase it, because we can cut it down, we can make it mucky, and then we just cut a new one, and we can do it time after time, and we can resize them, of course. So here I am opening my platform up to tab 1, and then I'm following the instructions for that. So I've got my stencil, then my card, and then I've got my embossing mat. So basically you just need to make sure that your card is in between your stencil and your embossing mat, whatever your chosen embossing mat is. And then I've got that in between my two cutting mats. I believe I put it through once, and then I found that there wasn't enough resistance, so I knew I wasn't going to get a very good emboss. So I put a couple of shims on to try and increase that pressure, to make sure that I get a nice raised image, because it's not like an embossing folder where you've got the raised areas on one side and then the hollows on the other side for it to kind of squish into. But what you can do to get a deeper emboss is you can cut two stencils and then glue them together, or take them together, and then that will give you a deeper emboss. But I've just done one layer. This is quite a thick mylar, but just to show you the effect that you can get from just one layer in your die cutting machine. And I'll be making some simple cards with the effects, so you can see what they're like when they're finished. And next we're going on to inking. I'm using the same stencil each time, so you've got a direct comparison. And I thought, rather than just inking one colour, I do like an ombre effect. So I've picked out a purple and a grey distress ink, and I'm having my purple on one side fading into my grey on the other. And then I used a coated cardstock, and I was very surprised at the crispness of the image that I got. I mean, it did very much look like a well stamped image when I took the stencil off. So this is great technique. Each stencil within the set is set to 5.5 inches at the widest part or tallest part. So you can obviously resize your stencils, but I wanted to leave a nice border around of the mylar or acetate or whatever it is that you're choosing to cut your stencil out of. You can even cut it out of spare packaging plastic. I mean, there's many things, but what I found with the inking in particular was that it worked better when I used a thinner material. When I tried it with the thicker mylar, which was great for embossing, and it's great for when you want a deeper impression or a more raised area with some things like texture paste. With inking in particular, I found that having a thinner stencil was a real benefit. It was easier to try and, if you think about it, try and squish the foam through the holes. So this was an acetate, and I found that it worked very well. You can see here that I've stuck my paper and then my stencil on top down with some washi tape strips, which are quite good for holding it in place. But if your mylar or packaging has been rolled on a tube or anything like mine had, it was bowing out slightly from the paper. So I've used some repositionable spray, the same spray that I actually use for my cutting mats, and that's called Stick and Spray from Crafter's Companion. And I sprayed a little bit of that onto the back of my stencil, and it was great for holding the stencil down nicely to my paper. So that's the inking. And then the next one we're moving on to is spritzing. So I had a bottle of ink, which I just spritzed over my stencil here. And I found because it had mica powders in that this one worked particularly well on dark card. Hence why I made it into a Halloween card. And later on I'll be using that ink again. Okay, we've done embossing, inking and spritzing, and I'm now going to move on to texture paste. And I've kind of got two techniques in one here, because this is this one is actually called modelling paste, but it's similar to texture paste, and there's many of them on the market and they all do a pretty similar job. And I've just taken one of my spatulas from my cutting that I use for my cutting mat, and I've used that to smooth my modelling paste over my stencil. But I thought I'd take it a step further. One thing to recommend is that you pop your stencil into water, because the paste can dry on there. But if the worst comes to the worst, and it does, you can just cut yourself a new stencil. But while this is wet, I thought, why not add some glitter? And whatever you add at this point will dry and set into the paste. The only problem I did have with this is because I've used some repositionable adhesive onto the back of my stencil, the glitter wanted to stick everywhere all over my card. So what you can do, if you don't mind wasting a little bit of glitter, is actually add it before you remove your stencil. Okay, here's another modelling paste technique. But this time I've added some of it to a little pot here, and I've taken some of that spritz that I used earlier on. But this could be any kind of ink that you have. It could be a re-ink, a couple of drops of re-inker, and it would do the same thing. But I'm just adding a few, I think I added 3 spritzes, and then I'm just mixing it in with my spatula and recolouring it, and then I'm just going to smooth it on. And it didn't really alter the texture or the use of it in any way. I didn't notice that there was any difference. It didn't spread or anything, because it was slightly wetter and it handled in the same way. But it did actually give a really lovely matte finish. It does look really lovely in the flesh, as it were. So I'm just scraping up, I'm just smoothing over, making sure I've got a fairly even coverage, because if you want to leave it very rough, that it does actually dry like that. So if that's an effect that you'd like, then that's how it looks when it's finished. Now, a similar product to texture paste is a glitter paste, and this is glitter suspended within like a gel rather than a paste. So the gel dries clear and then the glitter just shines through. This was actually my favourite technique of all. The effect is absolutely awesome. I did find that the texture was a little odd, and I wondered if I had to mix it, which you can see me doing here. But I don't think I did. I think it's just because it's kind of like a jellified consistency, so it's a little bit strange. And it did seem like a small pot when it turned up, but I used hardly any, and it was so easy to scrape back any spare gel and put it back in the pot, so there's no waste with this whatsoever. So in the same way to the modelling paste or the texture paste, you just smooth it over. And I'm only using a small spatula as well, and I have no trouble whatsoever. My stencil got quite mucky by this point because I've been trying all kinds of different techniques, and I was thinking normally I would probably panic at that point if I'd purchased the stencil, because you'd only get one, and if you let things dry on it that you shouldn't, but this is the glory of cut files. If we muck up a stencil, we just cut another one, and again and again. Okay, so I've scraped off most of the spare here, and I'm just rubbing the last little bit back in to make sure that there's no gaps or holes. And then this reveal was my favourite of the lot, because it looks a little bit mucky right there. I'm just going to lift this stencil off. And I have to say, the techniques I shared with you were the ones that I found had the best results. These are the ones that gave me the cleanest, crispest image. So that's why I'm sharing these particular ones with you. And that, in real life, again, with the glitter, it is really good, dimensional look, and it's something that I will go to time and time again. Now this one is all out. This is full on double glitter. So what you need to do is you need to acquire some double-sided adhesive sheets. I know some craft companies are doing them where they do an extra wide double-sided tape like we would use tissue tape. But I just got some A4 sheets on eBay and it was very inexpensive. Whatever you do not want to put your stencil directly onto the sticky card, with the sticky, the adhesive sheet on it. So what I've done is I've covered the underside of my stencil with Versamark. So that's the sticky ink, and it will allow you to release the stencil. So it won't actually, it'll stay in place while you're using it, but it will release. When I've done this technique with metal stencils, I used to rub soap over the back of them, and that works too, but obviously because the stencil isn't as firm, then it's a lot easier to just apply some Versamark over the back of your stencil, and then that'll give you that release that you need. Okay, now what I learned from this technique is that you need to brush off all of your spare glitter from your first colour. So our glitter has gone through the holes in our design, and if we try and take the stencil off now, any loose glitter that's clinging onto the stencil could shake off or ping off, you know, when you release it, and it will stick to all those sticky patches that are left remaining. So I found through trial and error that the best way is to remove all of your spare glitter now. And then I'll get a cloth and I'll give it a wipe over, and then we'll be ready to take the stencil off. And then what that gives us is a large sticky area to add our second colour. I had a pretty crisp image from this. I've got a couple of slight blurs down the bottom and a little piece in the middle that I couldn't remove. Once it's on there, there's no moving it. But I think my second colour should actually cover that up. You shouldn't really be able to see that. Okay, so now I'm going over with the silver. Now this can go right over the top because it won't stick where that purple is already stuck. It'll only stick to the areas that are left sticky. So I'm just rubbing the glitter around and making sure that all of the adhesive is fully covered in glitter, and then it's a lot easier to handle. And then I'll shake off the excess, and then you should see the purple detail come through. And there you have it. And I believe that was 7 or 8 techniques in this video, and I hope they come in handy while you play with your stencils.